Karan Shiyu squatted in the corner of the mine, holding a broken iron pole in his hand, covered in dust and sweat, like a clay man dug out of the soil. He gasped and glanced at the group of dwarf miners beside him, all of whom were pounding the stones, humming ancient folk songs in his mouth, and no one paid attention to him. The air in the mine was so jammed that it made people's chests jammed, and the light and shadow of the torch jumped on the stone wall, reflecting his face with a few stubbornness. "Hey, mixed-race boy, don't steal it." A dwarf mine with a thick voice and a rough voice passed away, his face shaking as if it was filled with wind, and his eyes were full of discouragement. "Your father is a dwarf, why didn't he bear our strength? He was so panting after a few knocks, and he wouldn't let anyone lose his life." Karan bit his teeth tightly, and he didn't say a word. He lowered his head and then fell down. Several pieces of fragments broke out from the stone, slamming his face. He had long been sarcastic and hot, and his mixed-race identity was like a tag engraved on his head, and he was pointed at everywhere he went. The dwarf looked down on him, saying that his blood was not pure and he was not qualified to inherit the glory of Shanfeng. There is no need to say that the spirit does not recognize him as his own person. He was a spirited traveler. He fell in love with the dwarf iron craftsman that year, but he gave birth to him, an elegant guy, and he was not waiting to see both. "I will not dig a piece less than you when I hit the stone until dark." Karan was filled with anger in his heart, and his head was even more ruthless. He knew that he had no talent and was not as strong as a pure dwarf, but he just didn't accept it. From small to old age, he heard too many stories about dwarf runes. Those ancient techniques could allow rocks to hear from the orders, seal the anger of the earth into the small stones, and were so powerful that they could blow up a city. Unfortunately, the rune technology has long been lost. The dwarves now only dig mines and make irons, and they almost forgot the glory of their ancestors. Just as I was thinking, the iron in my hand suddenly sounded click, as if it had hit something hard. Karan was stunned for a moment, squatted down and opened the gravel, and found a black stone head underneath, with dense lines engraved on the surface, which looked like some kind of pattern. His heart beat faster and he hurriedly wiped the ashes from the stone with his hands. The lines became clearer and clearer, and there was a strange smell that could not be described. "Is this, rune?" Karan muttered in a low voice, his eyes glaring like a copper horn. Although he had never seen the real runes, he had long since heard the old dwarf telling stories about the old dwarf. The pattern on this stone is exactly the same as the simple description in the story. He felt excited in his heart, and he rolled out the stone and held it in his hand to look at it carefully. The stone is not big, about the size of a fist, and there is a small ring in the center, like some kind of decoration, but it feels like it can penetrate the bones. Karan was just stunning when a roar suddenly came from his ears. "Karan! Are you fucking the fish again?" He shivered in surprise and hurriedly stuffed the stone into it. When he turned around, he saw that the mine was staring at him, and the whip in his hand was almost whipping. "It's okay, I just rolled the stone to see." Karan hurriedly pulled his hand and put on an innocent look, his heart pounding, for fear of being discovered. "Pull the stone? I think you want to steal a mine." Mining snorted coldly, walked over and grabbed Karan's lead, and pulled him up. "The mixed-race ones really have no good things. They rolled me out of the mine. Don't want to get a wage today." Karan was pushed and stumbled for a few steps, and the stone inside almost fell out. He tightly covered his clothes, gritted his teeth and said without further mouth. He knew it was useless to argue with these guys. The dwarf was stubborn and could not even get back what he thought. He lowered his head and walked out of the mine. The mountain wind blew towards him made him feel cold, but there was still a fire in his heart. "One day, I will let you guys close your mouth with these low-eyed men." He clenched his fists, touched the stone in his arms, and decided to find a place where no one was to study this thing first. Outside the mine is a deserted hillside. You can see the stone fort where dwarves live far away. Black smoke comes out of the smoke, and the air is filled with the smell of iron slag and coal. Karan found a large stone head and sat down, carefully took out the stone head, and took the light of Xiang to look carefully again. This time he saw it more clearly. The runes on the stone seemed to be alive, and there was a flow of light between the lines, like a certain force was sleeping in it. He tried to touch the ring with his fingers, but when he touched his hand, he suddenly buzzed in his brain, as if he was hit hard by something. His eyes went dark, and a low voice echoed in his ears, like a low voice coming from deep underground, let me. Kalan shook his hand and almost fell to the ground. He looked around and found that there was no one around, and his heart was so scared. Who is talking? The sound was no longer heard, but Kalan could feel the circles in the stone began to shake slightly, as if they had come alive. He was scared and curious in his heart. He hesitated for a long time, but he still didn't dare to touch the ring again. He stuffed the stone back and decided to go to Grumiron to ask clearly. Grum is one of the few rune masters among dwarves. Although he has a weird temper, he is quite good to Kalan. He has never taught him any knowledge about runes since he was a child. Kalan trotted all the way through the streets of Stone Fort. Many dwarves came across the strange gaze along the way. Some even spitted directly and said in a low voice, "Mixed race miscellaneous." He didn't hear anything about the dress and walked down quickly to the iron craftsman in Grom. The iron craftsman's door was half closed, and the sound of knocking on the iron was heard inside, making people's eyes feel sore. "Master Grom. I'm outside." Kalan stood at the door and shouted, not daring to go in directly. Grom is a man with a very weird temper. Sometimes he is in a bad mood and even irons can be thrown out and smashed. "Come in, boy, what's the ghost called?" A roar from the house, and Kalan pushed the door in. As soon as I entered the door, I saw Grom sitting next to the fire, his face full of beards was reddish by the fire. He was holding a red iron block in his hand, and was knocking the dinger with a snatch. He glanced at Kalan and snorted, "Has he been beaten again? Or was he mined?" Kalan slammed his head and smiled embarrassedly, "You guessed it all, but I didn't do this today." He took out the stone from it and passed it carefully. "Master, look at what this is. I dug in a mine today, and there seems to be runes on it." Grom's eyes lit up as he heard the words rune and his eyes began to lit up. He put down the iron, took the stone, and poured it into detail under the flames, his face becoming more and more solemn. After a while, he murmured in a low voice, This is impossible, this is the lost groundbreaking rune. Boy, where did you get it?" Really a rune?" Kalan was shocked and quickly said the rock digging past. Of course, he did not mention the strange sound, for fear that Grum would think there was something wrong with his brain. After hearing this, Grum was silent for a long time, his fingers gently slapped the lines on the stone, and a complex light flashed in his eyes. "This is not an ordinary rune, Kalan, this is a taboo force. A few hundred years ago, our ancestors almost destroyed the entire mountain because of this force. In the end, the clan leader ordered the seal, and no one would touch it again." He raised his head and stared at Kalan, his language was so low that it was scary. "You better give it to me, this thing is too dangerous." Kalan felt nervous and thought Grum hadn't said anything. He hesitated for a moment and said with a head, "Master, I dug up this, I want to keep it for research by myself." "Didn't you say that the dwarf's glory depends on us to find it back? This may be an opportunity." Grom's face darkened, as if he wanted to get angry, but in the end he still sighed and threw the stone back to Kalan. "All right, boy, but remember, this thing is not something you can do. If you can't control it, don't say it's you, and you'll have to follow the entire stone castle." He paused for a moment and added, "Also, don't let others know that you have this thing, especially those spirit messengers. They have been running towards the stone castle recently, and they know what ideas they have." Kalan points to the head, and he wonders in his heart. The spirit messenger? He had heard that recently the spirits sent several people to an alliance affairs, but not many of the dwarves believed they're ghosts. Although the spirit and the dwarf formed an alliance a few hundred years ago, the two sides have never been truly harmonious since then. The spirit looks down on the dwarf's roughness. The dwarf thinks the spirit is too arrogant and it is common for them to see each other. He was about to ask something more when a quick stance came from outside the iron craftsman. Then a young dwarf came in and shouted panting, "Master Grom." Oh no, the elf messenger is coming again, saying that he wants to see the clan leader, and he also brings a female traveler, which looks pretty cool. Grum sniffed his eyebrows, let the dwarf retreat, and turned his head to Kalan. Did you hear it? These long ears are coming to find trouble again. You go back first, don't say anything about your two, I have to see what they want to play with again. Kalan responded with a sound, held the stone in it tightly and walked out of the Iron Craftsman. It was already dark outside, torches were lit on the streets of the stone fort, and you could hear the dwarves gathered together to discuss the battle, and the sound was full of discomfort to the spirit. He didn't stop for much, and walked down to the small dilapidated house where he lived, but he felt uneasy, as if there were two eyes staring at him in the dark. What he didn't know was that in a forest outside the stone castle, an elf woman in a green cloak was standing on the top of the tree, her eyes passing through the night and locked far away on him. She held a long bow in her hand. Under the moonlight, the bowstrings were slightly shaking, as if an arrow would be shot at any time. A smile appeared on the corner of her mouth and said in a low voice, "The mixed-race dwarf is interesting. It seems that this time I came to Stone Castle, I will never be bored." Kalan returned to his cottage, closed the door, clicked a chicken of oil lamp, put the stone on the table, and stared at it for a long time. The low voice did not appear again, but he always felt that this thing was summoning him, as if he was hiding some secret waiting for him to dig. He gritted his teeth and decided that no matter what Grum said, he would try to see if he could wake up the power in this stone. "No matter what you are, it's better than I am now." He murmured in a low voice, stretched out his hand, and touched the ring again with trembling. This time, the buzz sound in the brain became even more exciting. A blurry light and shadow flashed in front of him, as if he saw a collapsed mountain. Numerous runes exploded in the air, and the roar from the ground made his ears numb. He suddenly withdrew his hand, his heart thumped as if it was about to explode, but a fire broke out in his eyes. He knew that the stone was definitely not simple, and he, Kalan Stone, might finally have caught a chance to change his fate. Kalan sat in front of the broken wooden table in the cottage, the flames of the oil lamp swayed, reflecting the expression on his face. He stared at the stone on the table with runes full of them, and his heart seemed to be filled with a rabbit, pounding. The light and shadow that had just passed in his brain was still in sight, the collapsed mountains, the exploded runes, and the deep roars underground, as if someone was whispering in his ears, urging him to try again. He swallowed, his fingers trembled above the stone. He hesitated for a long time, but he still didn't dare to touch them again. "No, you can't come blind," he said to himself, and forced his hand to retreat, leaning on the back of the chair and gasping. Master Grom's words were still heard in his ears. This thing was a taboo power, and he might really blow the stone castle up to the sky. Although he didn't accept it, he was not stupid enough to make a joke. "I have to find a reliable way to slowly figure out the bottom of this stone." The outside suddenly heard a rush of knocking on the door. Kalan was so shocked that he hurriedly stuffed the stone into it, got up and walked to the door, and asked in a low voice, "Who? Why are you looking for me in the middle of the night?" "Karan, it's me, Grom." The familiar voice of Shaji came from outside the door, and he heard a little anxiously, "Open the door quickly and tell you something." Kalan was stunned for a moment, and tightly pulled the door. Grom was dressed in iron craftsmanship, with a beard covered in dust, as if he had just run over the furnace. As soon as he entered the door, he looked around, with a little uneasy in his eyes, and said in a low voice, "Boy, is that stone still on you, right? Don't tell me that you have touched me." "No, no touch." Kalan hurriedly touched the place in his heart, and asked with a stern face, "Master, why did you come in the middle of the night? Didn't you go to see the elf messenger?" Grum hummed, dragged a broken stool and sat down, staring at Kalan. "It was because of the long ears that I came to find you." The clan leader had just talked with them for a long time, and the help spirit made a bullshit request, saying that he would send someone to investing our mines, and also called to see the dwarf who dug up recently, especially, "You have such a special identity." Kalan's heart sank, and her face was not very good-looking. "Special identity? They just say I'm a mixed race, are you fucking me? What do they want to fuck? Do they know I've dug up the stone?" "I shouldn't know, Grum slammed his head and said with a brow, but they must be making some tricks. The female traveler with the head, named Alice Moonblade, looked like an ordinary messenger, with sharp eyes like a knife, and always tugged at the mine when he asked. I doubt they heard something. Kalan, you have to be careful, that stone will never let them know. Kalan points to the head, and he wonders in his heart. The spirit messenger named him and wanted to see him, so it wasn't because of his mixed race identity, right? Although the spirit and the dwarf have not been harmonious these years, they have not been able to openly target individuals. He touched the stone in his mouth and said in a low voice, Master, why don't I hide for a few days first? Wait until the risk is over before coming back. Hide? Where to hide? Grum sneered and said with a slight sneer, Do you think the spiritual nose is shaved? They are looking for people in the forest more spiritual than dogs. You can't hide. The clan leader will arrange for you to meet them tomorrow. Remember, speak seriously, don't show off your bag. As for the stone, he put on his head, looking at Kalan with a complex look, you can watch it yourself, I'm still the same thing, this thing is not something you can do. After Grum finished speaking, he stood up and patted the ashes on his body, and before leaving, he added, Come tomorrow morning, I will teach you some ways to deal with long ears. Don't let me get rid of it. After speaking, he pushed the door away, leaving Kalan alone standing in the house and stunned. The night was getting deeper and deeper, and there were a few night birds outside the hut. Kalan sat at the table and formed a group of his brains. He knew Grum was for his own good, but he was always unwilling to give up. This stone may be his only chance to turn over. If he gave up this, wouldn't he have to be trampled under his feet? But if it is true that Grum said, if this force cannot be controlled, the consequences are not something he can withstand. Don't worry, try it first. Kalan gritted his teeth, took out the stone from it, placed it on the table, and took a deep breath. This time he did not touch the circle directly, but tried to use his fingers to easily trace the rune line on the stone. As soon as my finger touched the stone surface, I felt a cold chill rolling up my fingertips, as if the whole person was soaking in the ice water. He was shocked, but he did not retreat, and continued to slide along the line, and the low voice suddenly echoed in his brain, the inheritor touches the core. Kalan shook his hand and almost knocked the stone off the table. He gasped and looked around. There was still no one else in the room, only the flames of oil lamps were shaking. He whispered, How come this broken thing keeps scaring? But the curiosity in his heart became even more intense. The sound said touch the core, which meant that the ring. He hesitated for a long time, still plucked up his courage and gently pressed the cold stone ring. This time, my eyes didn't turn black like before, but instead a warm feeling came from my fingertips, like blood was boiling. The rune line on the stone suddenly lit up a faint light, as if it was ignited, and the air in the room began to shake slightly. Kalan's eyes widened, his heart beat as fast as a drumbeat, and the low voices on his ears became clearer and clearer. Strength, wake up, breaking the earth. Cracking the soil? Kalan repeated the low voice, and a thought suddenly flashed in his brain, could this stone control the power of the earth? He was about to try again, but his wrist suddenly became hot. When he looked down, he saw that the stone ring had actually left the stone and was automatically put on his wrist, as if he was alive, tightly clamping his skin, and he couldn't pull it down no matter how hard he pulled it. Collection, what's going on? Kalan panicked, and pulled the wrist for a few times, and his wrist was red. But the stone ring seemed to be growing on him, with the pattern not moving. He was busy with his hands, and a cold voice suddenly came outside the house, Karan Shiyu, what are you doing in the house? Kalan's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly pulled down his sleeves to cover his wrist. When he turned around, he saw a woman in a green cloak standing at the door. Her face was as cold as an ice sculpture under the moonlight, and her eyes were so bright that she could see through people. She held a long bow in her hand, and an arrow was placed on the bowstring. Although it was not full, the force made Kalan sweat on her back. Who are you? How did you come in? Kalan held her firmly, stood up and put it on the table, and her heart started to turn it off. This woman obviously is not a dwarf, but she is probably the spirit gamer, Grum said, Ellie Moonblade. The door is not locked, why can't I come in? Ellie smiled gently, put away the bow and arrow, walked into the room slowly, and glanced over the table behind Kalan, as if she could see through his little movements. I am the messenger of the spirit clan, Alice Moonblade. I heard that you are a special one in this stone castle, so I came here to see you. Special? Very bad. Kalan confided in his heart, and put on an innocent look on his face, saying, I'm just a miner, nothing special. You're looking for me in the middle of the night, wouldn't you want to talk about mines? Ellie didn't answer him, so she walked straight to the table, looked down at the oil lamp, and said lightly, I just passed by and heard the silence in your room, like a wave of power. Kalan, are you hiding something? Kalan felt a tight heart and smiled fiercely, silent. You heard it wrong. I am just a rough person, and I don't know what is not powerful. I just accidentally hit the table, it's nothing. He said, and glanced at his wrists secretly, but fortunately his sleeves were covered with seriousness and no stone ring was exposed. Ellie stood up and stared at him, her eyes as if she could see through. After a while, she spoke slowly, I hope you're saying it's true. Kalan, I'm not here to find trouble. On the contrary, I'm very interested in the narrative of the dwarf rune. If you know something, or you'll find something special, please tell me. We elves have a lot of research on ancient magic, which may help you. Kalan sneered in his heart and said, Hello, if I really find something, I will definitely tell you the first one. But I really have nothing special, it is a coolie who digs mines. You should ask someone else. Ellie didn't say anything anymore, but just glanced at him deeply and turned around and walked out. Kalan waited for her figure to disappear into the night before she relaxed her voice, closed her door tightly, leaned against the door and wiped her cold sweat. Why is the nose so spiritual with such long ears? She almost saw it. He lowered his head and looked at the stone ring on his wrist, feeling uneasy again. This thing can no longer be removed. Once it is discovered, don't talk about spirits, even the dwarfs have to deal with him as a monster. The next morning, Kalan went to the iron craftsman with 2 dark circles on his eyes. Grum was knocking on the iron mattress. When he saw him, he browsed, What's wrong? Didn't you sleep well last night? Or was it scared by long ears? Kalan smiled bitterly and told him about Ellie's visit to him last night. Of course, he didn't take the stone ring to wrist, for fear that Grum would directly spread it. After Grum finished listening, his face became even darker. He put down the iron and said, I knew that this kind of spirit is not good. Boy, you have heard it well. Today, the clan leader will take you to see them. Remember, he will be serious and don't let them talk. Also, the stone is hidden, don't carry it on his body. Once it is discovered, it will be terrible. The point of the Kalan is the head, and there is a little light in the heart. The stone ring is already on his wrist, how can I hide it? I can only pray that the helping spirit is blind and cannot be seen. He learned a few words of spiritual conversations with Grom, and then he was sent by the clan leader to call the stone castle hall. In the hall, several elf messengers were sitting on the stone chair, Ellie stood in the front, and the green cloak was particularly eye-catching under the fire. The dwarf chief sat in the main seat, his face trembling like a grass in the wind, and obviously he had no good feelings for this long ear. As soon as Kalan came in, everyone's eyes fell on him, especially Alice, and his eyes were shivering with hair on his back. Carlin Stone, right? Ellie opened her mouth, her voice cold, with a high smell. I heard that you are a miner in the stone castle and have had a lot of harvest in the mines recently. We are very interested in the dwarf's mine collection. Why don't you say, what have you dug? Kalan felt tight in his heart, and he looked honest, saying, Sir, I am a coolie, and I am all dug ordinary stones, nothing special. If you want to see the mine, ask us mines, he knows better than me. Ellie narrowed her eyes, as if she didn't believe him, but she didn't ask, just said lightly, Is that right? That's a pity. I thought, like you, special people will find something different. Kalan's heart said, Long ears will really make you stumble and beat you up. He smiled and said, What's the special thing? I'm just a mixed race. I have no ability. Digging mines is slower than others. The messenger respects me more. The atmosphere in the hall was a bit stiff. The dwarf chief coughed and broke the silence. Okay, Alice Messenger, Kalan is an ordinary miner, there is nothing to ask. If you are really interested in mining, I will arrange for someone to take you to the mine to take a look, so it's not difficult for a little boy. Ellie smiled and pointed, okay, then we'll go to the mine. Kalan, since you're a miner, why not take the road together? Kalan's heart skipped a beat, and she kept staring at him, but she still responded with her head on her face. In the next few days, he had to follow Ellie and his group into and out of the mine, which was an ostensibly guided path, but actually was monitored. He could feel that Ellie's eyes always fell on him intentionally and unintentionally, especially when he accidentally showed his wrist. Her eyes suddenly became sharp. Life in the mine is not easy. Ellie and hers checked from all over the place and asked the West, as if they were really looking for something. Kalan's heart became more and more uneasy, especially the stone ring on his wrist, which would get hot from time to time, as if reminding him something. He knew that this thing would have been exposed long ago, but he couldn't take it off and could only hold it hard. A few days later, things finally went wrong. That day, Kalan was walking deep into the mine with Ellie and his group. When he passed the area where he had dug up the stone before, the stone ring on his wrist suddenly shook violently, as if he was attracted by something. He was shocked, and he stopped quickly, lowered his head and pretended to cover his shoes. Kalan, what's wrong with you? Ellie's voice came from behind, with a bit of inquiry. She walked over and her eyes fell on his wrist. Although her sleeves were covering her, her eyes seemed to be able to penetrate the fabric. No, it's okay, it's just that my feet are a little sour, take a break. Kalan stood up with a smile, but he didn't expect that the stone ring suddenly emitted a faint light at this time. Although it was very light, it was particularly eye-catching in the dim mine. Ellie's eyes narrowed for a moment and said in a low voice, Kalan, what is on your wrist? Kalan's heart was filled with a flash and knew that he could not hide this time. He gritted his teeth and decided to start first. He turned around and ran deep into the mine. He ran and shouted, Sir, I suddenly remembered that there was a mine in front of me that had not been dug up. Go and take a look first. Stop. Alice's voice was as cold as ice, and then there was a rapid sound of footsteps, which obviously she caught up with her. Kalan was so panicked that she had only one thought in her brain: she couldn't catch it, otherwise the matter of the stone ring would definitely not be able to stop. The mine became darker and darker, and he ran out of breath, and his feet stumbled and almost fell down. At this moment, the stone ring on his wrist suddenly shook violently again, and the familiar low words echoed around his ears, cracking the soil, wake up, power. At the same time, the ground under his feet began to shake slightly, as if something was about to break out of the ground from the ground. Kalan was stunned and turned around and saw that Ellie had chased him far away. The long bow in his hand was already full, and the arrow pointed directly at his heart. She said coldly, Kalan, don't run away, hand over what you have in your hands, I won't hurt you. Kalan bit his teeth tightly, and suddenly pressed the stone ring on his wrist and roared, want to take it away? Make a dream. As the voice fell, the stone ring shone brightly, and a piece of tinder suddenly cracked the ground under his feet, and the heat of burning sprayed out from the ground, shaking the entire mine trembled. Ellie's face changed, she quickly put away her bow and arrow, raised her hand to summon a green shield to block the flying gravel. She stared at Kalan, her language was filled with a few shocks. Dwarf Rune, you really have the power of Taboo. Kalan himself was also confused. He didn't expect the stone ring to suddenly explode, and the cracks under his feet were still expanding, as if the entire mine was about to collapse. He was afraid and excited in his heart, and he felt that although this force was dangerous, it might be the key to his change of fate. Ally, I don't want to hurt anyone, but don't force me. He shouted, turned around and continued to run deep into the mine, and his brain became a group, just wanting to find a place to hide first and figure out what's going on with this stone ring. Behind him, Ellie's eyes locked on his back, a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she said in a low voice, the power of Taboo. It seems that this mixed race dwarf is much more interesting than I think. Kalan stumbled and ran deeper into the mine, and the ground under his feet was still shaking, and the cracks were like huge openings, sprinkling heat from time to time, making his eyes silence. Ellie's stomp behind her seemed to be vague. Although she didn't shout again, the invisible pressure made him sweat in his back. His heart was as numb as if he was numb. The stone ring on his wrist was as if he was about to wear his skin. The low voice on his ears became more and more rapid, cracking the soil. Control, life. Close your mouth. I haven't heard you talk now. Kalan said softly, bit his teeth tightly, found a narrow fork, and dripped in, leaning against the stone wall to breathe heavily. The light from the depths of the mine was almost gone, only the occasionally flashing light on the stone ring illuminated his sweaty face. He glanced down at his wrist. The stone ring seemed to be alive, and the rune line flowed on the surface, as if it was about to burst out even greater power at any time. He knew that Ellie would not let him go easily. He just broke the ground and guessed that the entire stone castle could feel the shock. Maybe even the dwarf chief and Grum would be shocked. Kalan felt a lot of pain in his heart. He originally wanted to be low-coordinated and slowly figure out the secret of the stone ring. Who knew that things would be so big? Now that the spirit is on his mind, the dwarf must also treat him as a nuisance. He has no way out. Carlin Stone, you can't escape. Ellie's cold voice came from afar, as if it could penetrate the stone wall and pierce his heart. Kalan's heart tightened, held his breath quickly, moved against the stone wall, and tried to find a place to hide. But he couldn't be familiar with this mine. The deep road had already reached its peak. There was only a dead end after a landslide in front of him, full of gravel and soil, and there was no place to hide. Damn it, why didn't there be any exit? Kalan lowered his voice, wiped the sweat from his face, and his brain flew quickly. It is definitely not possible to fight hard. Ellie pulled the bow and arrow and probably didn't have time to react. But just sitting and waiting for him is not his style. He gritted his teeth, looked down at the stone ring on his wrist, and felt a slight in his heart. Don't matter, it's like this anyway, it's better to catch a snatch. He took a deep breath, reached out and pressed the stone ring, closed his eyes and tried to feel the power. The low voice in his brain instantly amplified, pouring in like a flood. With a stinging pain, the broken light and shadow flashed in front of him again, collapsed mountains, burning runes, and the roar deep in the ground. His heart was so fast that it was about to explode, but this time he did not retreat and he roared softly, "Take me away. I don't want to die here." The sound just fell, the stone ring shone brightly, and the heat on the wrist was almost burning the skin. The ground under the foot shook violently again, and the pile of landslides in front suddenly began to move, as if it was pushed open by an invisible hand, and a narrow piece broke out, and just as if it was a person who had just diamonded it. Kalan's eyes lit up, and he couldn't think too much about it. He hurriedly dripped in with his waist. The gravel behind him rumbled and rumbling, as if he had never been opened. "It's done!" Kalan was ecstatic, but before he could catch his breath, the stone wall behind him suddenly felt a crisp sound, as if he was hit hard by something. He turned around and saw a small crack on the stone wall. Ellie's voice came from behind the gap, and he sneered, "The power of the dwarf rune is indeed unfair. Kalan, do you think this can be thrown away?" Kalan's heart skipped a beat, and he was so nervous that his ears were so tight that he quickly climbed forward. The narrow slot was filled with soil and sharp stones, which made him hurt, but he couldn't feel any pain, and just wanted to rush and throw him away. After climbing for about 10 meters, it suddenly opened up ahead, and a small underground cavity appeared, with a damp musty smell in the air, as if no one has been here for hundreds of years. Kalan stood up with his knees and looked around, and found that the hollow stone wall was also full of runes, which were more complex than the ones on his stone, covering the entire wall densely. The stone trembled again at this time, as if attracted by something, and made a low voice. Kalan's heart moved, and looked closer to the stone wall, and found that these runes were filled with a familiar breath, as if they were on the stone ring. "This place, is it hard to say that it's rune-like?" he murmured in a low voice, flashing the words Grum had told in his brain. It is said that a few hundred years ago, the dwarf ancestors left runes in the cracked soil to seal the power of the earth, but later because the forbidden power was out of control, most of these spies were destroyed, and the rest were forgotten. He didn't expect that he would enter this place by mistake. Just as I was thinking, a deep hole suddenly came from the depths of the void, as if something was awakening from Sue. Kalan tightened his heart, clamped his fists and tried to walk in. The more he went, the air became colder and the light of the stone ring became brighter, making him able to see clearly the way forward. After walking for 10 steps, a huge stone tablet appeared in front of me, 3 people tall, with runes engraved on the surface, and in the center was an object that was almost exactly the same as the stone circle, but it was several times larger, emitting faint blue light. "What's this?" Kalan swallowed, feeling both excited and scared. He could feel that the power on this stone tablet was many times stronger than the stone ring, and there was a sense of pressure in the air, as if he could crush him at any time. He hesitated for a moment, still stretched out his hand, and gently touched the runes on the stone tablet. Just as his fingers touched, a buzzing sounded in his brain, as if he was struck by lightning. There were countless pictures in front of him, the battle between the dwarf and the spirit, the ancient gods deep underground, and the situation where the rune power broke out. He saw a vague figure standing on the collapsed mountain, holding a stone ring in his hand, and roaring, "The power of Taboo will eventually destroy everything." Kalan suddenly withdrew his hand, stumbled back a few steps, and was sweating coldly. His heart was overturned, and finally he understood why Grim said that this power was a taboo. The stone ring and this stone tablet are not anything to save the enemy, but a fried medicine bag that can destroy the entire cracked soil. He was about to turn around and run when a sound of footsteps suddenly came from the hollow entrance. Ellie's figure appeared in the dim light. The long bow in his hand was already stretched, and the arrow pointed directly at his heart. "Kalan, don't move." Her voice was as cold as ice, her eyes swept over the stone tablet, and she was shocked. "Is this the source of the dwarf rune? You actually found this place?" Kalan bit his teeth tightly and said, "Ellie, I don't know where this is. I just came in by mistake. If you want a stone ring, just take it, don't force me to fight to the death." Ellie sneered and lowered the bow and arrow, but her eyes were still locked on him. "Stone ring? Kalan, do you think I want only the gadget in your hand? The power in this elves is the real taboo power. As long as you control it, the alliance between the spirit and the dwarf, no, the fate of the entire rift will change." Kalan's heart sank, believing that things were not right. How come Ellie doesn't sound like an ordinary spirit messenger? What exactly does she want to fuck? Just as I was about to open my mouth, a sudden rush of footsteps came from the void, followed by a cold smile. "Alice, I didn't expect you to find this place too. However, this taboo power is not something you can touch." Kalan and Ellie turned around at the same time, and only saw a virgin man in a black robe walking into the void, his face as white as a ghost, and a sick smile was hanging on the corner of his mouth. He held a twisted staff in his hand, emitting an ominous breath. Kalan was surprised and realized that this guy Valjuan Blackthorn, the fallen man in the spiritual clan, said he had been expelled from the clan long ago, and he didn't expect to appear here. "Valdern, why are you here?" Ellie's voice was a little alert, and his hand was already touching the bowstring, which obviously had no good feelings for this guy. Valjuan grinned, his eyes swept over Kalan and the stone tablet, his eyes filled with greed. "Why can't I be here? The power of taboo is my goal for many years. Alice, do you think that only you self-righteous righteous people deserve it? I tell you that this power belongs to those who can control it. And I will use it to awaken the sleeping ancient gods and reshuffle the cracked earth." Kalan heard that his back was waking up. Is this guy's brain sick? Awaken the ancient god? That thing almost destroyed the entire mainland a few hundred years ago. Does he want to come back again? Ally did not expect Valjuan's ambition to be so great. Her face darkened and she said in a low voice, "Valjuan, you're crazy. The power of the ancient god is not something we can control. You will destroy everyone." "It's destroyed?" No, I'll rebuild it." Valjuan laughed wildly, and a black air burst into pieces in an instant, forcing Kalan and Ellie to retreat. His eyes were locked on Kalan's wrist and said coldly, "Hybrid boy, hand over the stone ring, which is the key to opening the stone tablet. As long as I get it, the ancient god will return. Kalen's heart slammed in his heart, and suddenly retreated to the stone tablet, gritted his teeth and said, "Dream. This thing is a taboo. If you take it, you will harm others and yourself." Before he finished speaking, Valjuan had already swung his staff, and the black air turned into a number of touches, and rushed towards him. Ellie reacted very quickly, and quickly pulled the bow and shot an arrow. The green light flashed, and she forced a touching hand, but the darkness still forced Kalen to retreat. "Carlin, don't force yourself, use the power of the stone ring," Ellie shouted, and at the same time summoned a green shield to forcefully suppress Valjuan's attack. Kalen felt a slight swelling in his heart, knowing that he would be in danger if he didn't fight back. He suddenly pressed the stone ring on his wrist and roared, "Give me a blow." The stone ring shone brightly, and the ground under the foot cracked again, and the burning heat sprayed out, turning into an invisible wave of shock, directly rushing Valjuan away. Valjuan's face changed, his staff was swollen, and the black air was holding back his slam, but he was still shocked and took a few steps back, and a blood spilled out of the corner of his mouth. "Good boy, I really have some ability." Valjuan wiped the corner of his mouth, his eyes even more crazy, "But you can't control this power at all, it will soon retaliate against yourself. Hand over the stone ring, I can save your life." Kalen was panting, and the stone ring on his wrist was so burning that he could hardly hold his fists, but he still gritted his teeth and said, "Save my life? I believe you are a ghost. Come and get it if you have the ability," he said, urging the stone ring again, and the ground trembled even more violently, the entire hole began to collapse, and the gravel fell like rain. Ellie took the opportunity to rush to Kalen and said in a low voice, "Kalen, don't fight hard, this place is about to collapse. We have to go out first." Kalen was pointed, and she knew that everyone would have to bury it if she continued to fight, but Valjuan obviously didn't plan to let them go. As soon as the staff was blown, the black air rushed over again, blocking the hollow exit. "Want to run?" "No door." Valjuan laughed wildly, his eyes locked in the stone tablet. "Since you don't cooperate, then let's bury it here together. The power of the ancient god will be reborn in your flesh and blood." A flash of Kalen's heart felt an unprecedented sense of pressure scattered from the stone tablet, as if there was something really to wake up. He clenched his teeth and turned his head to Ellie. "Long ears, let's work together to fuck this crazy person, otherwise no one will get out." Ellie had a small tip, her bowstring was full, and the green light intertwined with the light of the stone ring, barely resisting Valjuan's attack. The two of them joined forces to keep the situation stable, but the hollow collapse became more and more serious, and the blue light on the stone tablet became stronger and stronger, with a rustic sound rising, like the call of an ancient god. "Carlin, the stone tablet can't be touched again, otherwise the ancient god will really wake up," Alice shouted, with a few anxiety in her voice. Kalen felt nervous and knew that she was right, but Valjuan had already pressed to the stone tablet, and the staff in his hand pointed directly at the center of the ring, and obviously intended to open it. "It's too late. Ancient god, come to surrender." Valjuan roared wildly, his staff was so black that it was so bright that the blue light on the stone tablet exploded in an instant, and the entire void was illuminated as white. Kalen and Ellie were shocked at the same time, hitting hard on the stone wall, and a roar came from the sky, like a roar from the deepest part of the ground. "Damn it, I'm really awake." Kalen got up, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and felt an irresistible force pouring out of the stone tablet, causing him to kneel down. Valjuan stood in front of the stone tablet, his face full of heat, but soon his laughter turned into a cry, and the black air backed down, swallowing him in an instant, turning into a bloody fog. "Silly goods, this is the power you want." Kalen lowered his voice and turned to Ellie. He found that she was hurt too, so he stood up with his bow. The blue light on the stone tablet became stronger and stronger, and the low voice turned into a real shock, forcing them to retreat to the hollow. "Carlin, seal it with a stone ring." Ellie gritted her teeth and shouted, "You are a dwarf blood vessel, only you can do it." Kalen felt nervous and knew that this was the last chance. He took a deep breath, endured the pain of his wrist, and suddenly pressed the stone ring and growled, "I don't care what you are, let me go back to sleep." The light of the stone ring was fighting against the blue light of the stone tablet, and the two forces collided in the cavity, shaking the entire space. He felt his consciousness be pulled into chaos, and the low voices in his ears turned into roars, trying to swallow his will. But he gritted his teeth and had only one thought in his brain: he couldn't let this thing destroy the cracked soil. I don't know how long it took, but the blue light finally began to weaken, and the rings on the stone tablet made a sound of crispness, cracked into pieces, and fell to the ground. Kalen's eyes turned dark and his mind was almost dissipating, but he still held his back and saw Ellie coming to support him. The collapse of the void finally stopped. Although his eyes were full of devastation, the urgency had disappeared. He gasped and said in a low voice, This broken thing has finally stopped." Ellie pointed her head and looked at him with a complex look. "Carlin, you saved everyone, including spirits and dwarves." She paused for a moment and then added, "But the stone ring is still in your hands, and this power is still a concern." Kalen smiled bitterly and looked down at his wrist. The light of the stone ring was dim, but it was still tightly clamped, as if it would never leave. He knew that this thing was troublesome, but perhaps it was also his only chance to change his fate. "Long ears, don't rush to discuss it for me." He grinned and stood up. "How to use this power, I have to decide on it myself. Let's go out of this place first, and go back and explain it to Grom and the clan." Ellie didn't say anything anymore, but just followed him silently, and the two of them walked out of the void. The mines on the outside were still dark, but the dwarfs were shouting from afar, as if Grom had brought people to find them. Kalen felt relaxed, and he knew that the wind was not over. The secret of the stone ring, the alliance of the spirit dwarves, and the future of the cracked earth are still waiting for him to face it.